Okay, hello. uh, 31 January. This and that, this and that information on theautonomouscollective.net. Tonight, if I'm not mistaken, we will have After Hours and Twilight Zone, and I think, or something. Yes, Twilight Zone, I guess. We'll see. Today, what I wanted to think about was because I've been hunting down a line of inquiry that overlaps with other things. And I, of course, keep looking for reasonable left analyses of crypto. And there's a kind of genre of libertarian kind of addressing what they think Marx said and sort of applying it mechanically in a kind of weird as a kind of a misappropriation of ideas. But it's fascinating, and I find those kinds of things fascinating. There's a group of folks who are, I think it's Koch brothers or Koch brother um, funded groups in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, who have also supported some other right-wing amusements, the so-called Great Barrington Statement, I guess, or whatever declaration of resisting COVID. So uh, they're up there and out there, needless to say. A free market think tank based in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, having a history of promoting climate change denial, the benefits of sweatshops, and anyway, an institution embedded in a Koch-funded network that denies climate science while investing in polluting fossil fuel industries. So pretty much, the kind of thing that's supported by Trump. Trump certainly was in support of the Great Barrington Statement about critiquing lockdowns, sort of the anti-statist thing that goes on with right-wing libertarians, which is always ironic for them. So this is how they describe surplus value in Marxist theory. The relationship between surplus value from Marxist economics and cryptocurrency is complex and debated. The core concept in Marxist theory, surplus value is the difference between the value created by workers in the production process and the wages they receive. Well, yes and no. Capitalist exploitation. Capitalists, by owning the means of production, extract surplus value from workers, which forms the basis of capitalist profit. Well, not quite that either. Surplus value exists. It's just not, the equivalence between the two is more nuanced, let's put it that way. Cryptocurrency and surplus value in terms of the crypto mining. Cryptocurrency mining requires significant computational power and energy. The energy consumption can be seen as a form of labor. No, it not really, though not human labor. Um, I mean, well, no, it's just not. The value generated by the cryptocurrency network, for example, transaction processing security, can be seen as a product of this quote unquote labor. Well, you see, it already doesn't makes less sense as you go further into it. Speculation and trading, a significant portion of cryptocurrency activity involves speculation and trading. Profits generated from trading cryptocurrencies can be seen as a form of surplus value extracted from other traders rather than from direct labor and production. Well, you can draw that contrast, but that's not really how it's going to work or how it does work. And you can see that it really operates in a much different way. It's more like operates like hedges or some other kinds of things that are still, they're not labor. They're they're capital. There's forms of capital. Labor of development, the creation and development of cryptocurrency protocols and applications involve intellectual labor. Now, that's kind of where, if there were going to be production or a production model, it would be in terms of intellectual labor, or that has a seems more intangible, right? Programming, design, etc. This labor contributes to the value of the cryptocurrency and can be seen as a source of surplus value for those involved in its development. Yes and no, and I think that NFTs have shown us a different way in which we can think about the problem of intangible assets. Challenges in applying Marxist theory: immaterial labor. And that is an important concept. The idea of material versus the immaterial, but not necessarily circling on the issue of labor. It may, in fact, be on the issue of capital. The concept of labor in the context of cryptocurrency mining and development is complex. It's not easily comparable to traditional industrial labor. Indeed, it cannot be in that sense. But it does have elements that are important, and I think this sort of shoves everything back to the idea of commodity. So decentralization, the decentralized nature of many cryptocurrencies makes it difficult to identify clear exploitative relationship between capitalists and workers. You see, that's an incredibly mechanical application of the idea that there are capitalists and then there are workers, which is amusing. I mean, on the one hand. On the other hand, it ignores the nature of how classes are formed and, the relation to nature and all that other stuff. Speculative value. The value of many cryptocurrencies is highly speculative and volatile, making it difficult to apply traditional Marxist concepts of value and surplus value. Well, it didn't stop this guy from writing it. And so, in summary, while there are some potential connections between surplus value and cryptocurrency, applying Marxist concepts to the cryptocurrency world presents significant challenges: the decentralized nature of cryptocurrency, the role of speculation, and the evolving nature of blockchain technology require a nuanced and critical analysis that goes beyond traditional Marxist frameworks. So, there's just, it's all sort of specious logic in trying to sort of shoehorn it sort of that way. I think the better way to look at it is to think about capital, that there's commodities, that circulation is actually the more important element of this. This is constant circulation. You're paying for, the circuit of capital that cryptocurrency exists in. And so all of this palaver here about labor makes little or no sense, because it is an overemphasis on the kind of traditional model of a labor theory of value. Further considerations. Now, this is where it is important. Cryptocurrency is a tool for capital. Some argue that cryptocurrency can be used as a tool for capital accumulation and speculation, potentially exacerbating existing inequalities. You think? And then the DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs raise questions about the nature of labor, ownership, and control in the context of decentralized systems. And that is actually a more important institutional element. So anyway, so one of the usual sort of right libertarian clones, who this guy Burns, I think he teaches in Louisiana or someplace, but he's a George Mason graduate. George Mason, of course, is one of those departments that got lots of Koch money. That is the Koch brothers' money to support, a more right wing or conservative or free market, however you want to refer to them, libertarian viewpoint. So he wrote something a while back, but if you look at this AIER site from Great Barrington, they have this small secondary literature that tries to, sort of suck you into the cult. It's kind of addressed to Gen Z, to convince Gen Z that a right libertarian view is going to be good because it resists the oppressive state, that the state that could also be seen as the deep state, and the all those liberals, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of interesting to see that. But here's another version of, trying to disinform us, I think, on the Marxist theory of value. In his November 29th interview with Bloomberg News, Columbia economist and Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz adamantly and controversially made the case that Bitcoin ought to be outlawed. And that caused a bunch of flurries of people from this Great Barrington place. There have been several line-by-line replies to Stiglitz. I won't rehash all of the arguments there. Well, most of it is kind of pejorative name-calling. Instead, I will just address one of the most perplexing claims in the interview, that Bitcoin is somehow based on a Marxist theory of value. Well, that's a whole misreading of the question, that it's not about a value theory, and Bitcoin is a commodity form. It's just one of many money-like commodity forms that is a problematic element of, financialization. And all of these kinds of instruments, capital instruments, are the things that are causing the trouble. Particularly since they lack a kind of basis in, they're detached, as it were, from certain protections or certain ways in which you can protect capital from a regulatory point of view. And so in the deregulatory or anti-regulatory context, Marx is a good thing to sort of bash people with. It's just a total misreading of this. But, they persist in this. The Marxist theory of value is more commonly known as the labor theory of value. Karl Marx employed the theory in Das Kapital. It was by no means the first. Labor theory of value, the staple of classical economists, including Adam Smith. In brief, the labor theory of value maintains that the value of any good or service is ultimately determined by the amount of labor used to produce it. See, that's such a superficial reading of what we've been looking at, the difference between labor and labor power, a certain expectation about labor as an abstraction, as a commodity form that ultimately becomes money. And so the idea of this already at the get-go, he sort of misunderstands the nature of what counts as even labor in this particular context. Few economists accept the labor theory of value today, and we've discussed that. Instead, they follow Carl Menger, William Stanley Jevons, and Leon Walras, whose pioneering work in the marginalist subjectivist revolution of the 1870s spawned neoclassical economics. As these authors showed, value is not determined by the amount of time and energy that is devoted to producing an item. Now, that is true relative to the Marxian question, and then he does a little thing, a white guy rap, more money, more inflation, more problems, blah, blah, blah. Rather than merely reflecting the amount of labor used in production, modern economists maintain that value is ultimately determined by the subjective valuation of consumers. Well, I'm not sure that value is determined by that, but there is certainly subjective valuation. There certainly are consumers, but combining all those words doesn't necessarily get you what you're supposed to get. Value is what the marginal buyer is willing to pay for a given item. It is this price that traces back through the supply chain and helps determine what the market wage would be for workers and capital owners. Now, that's the assumption. Whether this proves out, is kind of the key issue. It's hard to think of an asset that more clearly disproves the labor theory of value than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has no physical manifestation. It is not backed by some underlying commodity. New Bitcoins are created every 10 minutes as a reward for processing a batch of transactions. But the actual work being done to mine new coins is conducted by high-powered computers, not labor. Sure, those machines were produced by labor. So one might argue that using those computers more intensely is, in effect, using, this is where it totally goes wrong, more labor embedded in capital per unit of time. But the rising value precedes the rising cost. As such, the labor theory of value doesn't cut it. Bitcoin's value, like all other goods and services, is ultimately determined by people's willingness to pay for it, are in that free market, it reflects their subjective evaluation of its value to them and others. So, there's this universe of atomized individuals who make up their minds, with relative to complete autonomy, and there are just free-floating minds who, there are no institutions. Anyway, so as a response to this kind of argument, we at least move a little closer in a set of commentaries by Cian McMahon and Terence MacDonald, which a little later, a series of notable recent anniversaries in the heterodox, non-mainstream, non-orthodox economics calendar have prompted a reconsideration of Karl Marx's lasting influence within the field. Most prominently, 2018 marked the bicentenary of Marx's birth, while 2019 witnessed the centenary of U.S. left economist Hyman Minsky's birth. 2020 is the 50th anniversary of Polish socialist economist Mikhail Kalecki's passing, and 2021, the 150th anniversary of Polish Marxist political economist Rosa Luxemburg's birth. The revival of interest in such alternative economic thinking reflects the failures of mainstream economics to foresee, explain, or remedy the present crisis of neoliberal capitalism. The global financial crisis of 2008 created a legitimacy crisis for finance-led capitalist accumulation and even for the capitalist mode of production outright. The ensuing decade and more of austerity cutbacks, which disproportionately impacted the poorest, only served to deepen the contradictions of capitalism in crisis, further stoking class and identity-based inequalities and tensions. When the federal government takes out, a lot of these, Black History Month, they just eradicate willy-nilly all kinds of cultural identity there. The point is, while you're going to eliminate all these newer ones, well, why not, do it completely? Columbus Day, there's just stuff. The latest chapter in this saga has seen the neoliberal recovery strategy crash and burn under the weight of overlapping political, economic, and social ecological contradictions, from wage stagnation, record debt levels, weak profitability, and underinvestment in public infrastructure, to climate catastrophe, mass extinction, COVID-19, and increasing social conflict. This has led to a renewed appetite amongst social and socialist organizations for progressive and radical economic ideas and strategies to inform activist political education. There's also growing interest within the academy and amongst students. Though the stranglehold of neoclassical economics over public education and mainstream economic commentary and policy has so far proven difficult to breach. While Marxist economics provided the dominant alternative political economic paradigm during the previous structural crisis of capitalism, look where that got us, the heightened social conflict of the 1960s intersecting with the stagflation of the 1970s, different varieties of Keynesian economics have been the main beneficiary this time around. Minsky of the Minsky moment fame and Kalecki of relatively little fame are generally more recognized as key contributors to the heterodox so-called post-Keynesian, read fundamentalist Keynesian school of economics. According to Keynes's preeminent biographer, the post-Keynesian school of economists has remained closest to the spirit of Keynes's general theory. The post-Keynesians, building on the most radical aspects of Keynes's work, stand opposed to what Joan Robinson called the bastard Keynesianism of the orthodox so-called neoclassical school. By contrast, the neoclassical Keynesian synthesis of the post-World War II period, represented today by figures like Paul Krugman, late of the New York Times, incorporates superficial aspects of the Keynesian critique while ignoring more fundamental arguments that break with the core precepts of mainstream economic theory. Yet the post-Keynesian tradition in reality owes as much to Marx as its namesake. Indeed, as one of Keynes's closest and most celebrated collaborators, Joan Robinson, commented in a somewhat cryptic reply to the question of whether she considered herself a Marxist that, Everybody has learned a great deal from Marx. His diagnosis of capitalism is the only one that makes any sense. This is the premise of our article, Marxism, Crypto-Marxism, and the Political Economy of Capitalism, a contribution to the Review of Political Economy commemorative issue on the continuing relevance of Marx. We maintain that the old mole's foundational influence extends well beyond the self-identified Marxian school to several other important heterodox traditions within economics. Although this often passes unrecognized on both sides, consequently, the proper boundaries of the Marxian school of economics are much wider than either many self-identified Marxists or indeed crypto-Marxists generally consider. Self-identification as a Marxist or otherwise is fundamentally a matter of politics and or philosophy, meaning that such identifications cannot simply be attributed to the courage or cowardice of professional economists. Heterodox economists are universally reviled and or ignored within the mainstream, if to varying degrees after all. Nevertheless, we argue that each of the Minskian, post-Keynesian, Sraffian, institutional feminist, and social ecological dominant schools branches of heterodox economics make a significant contribution in developing effectively Marxist themes and theory. Self-identified Marxists as well as crypto-Marxists stand to benefit intellectually and practically from a mutual recognition of this implicit division of heterodox economic flavor. We discuss Marx's influence on each school in turn. Several prominent post-Keynesian thinkers and historians of economic thought, such as John King, argue that Kalecki's work is more realistic and superior and surpassed that of Keynes. Again, taking Joan Robinson as an exemplar, she was quick to point out that Kalecki independently produced a more coherent version of the general theory, that is Keynes's general theory, which complemented a monetary accounting analysis with a Marxist analysis of class dynamics, profitability, and the concentration and centralization of capital. In contrast to Keynes's background in economic and neoclassical economics, Kalecki was introduced to the discipline through reading leading Marxist economists of the day, such as his brilliant compatriot Rosa Luxemburg. Marx even had a covert influence on Keynes's view of capitalism as fundamentally a monetary production economy when he adapted Marx's famous circuit of capital in early draft chapters of the general theory. This was abandoned for a more conventional framing in the final draft. However, likely to avoid any radical associations, these earlier drafts were aired some decades after being discovered in a laundry hamper. It's apocryphal. Given Minsky's strong public association and personal identification with Keynes, it is perhaps somewhat ironic that the former's socialist parents met at a gala of the Jewish section of the Socialist Party in Chicago to celebrate the centenary of Karl Marx's birth, which is why the centenary of Minsky's birth is 1 year after the bicentenary of Marx's. Although usually remembered as an advocate of left Keynesian social democratic reforms of the capitalist system in later life, he had been active in the Socialist Party of America for a period later on. Kalecki was a particularly important intellectual influence, whereas Marx's focus was on the production of surplus value, that is, the labor process, and Kalecki's on the realization of surplus value, that is, the dynamic components of aggregate demand or total spending. Minsky focused on a complementary analysis of financial instability, that is, speculative, credit-driven financial booms and busts. Gee, how important. This certainly built on Keynes's insights regarding fundamental uncertainty and what he termed the animal spirits of investors, i.e., herd behavior concerning expectations of asset price fluctuations and future profitability. Italian Marxist circuitist Riccardo Bellafiore recently emphasized this hidden Marxian undercurrent in Minsky's work. His first doctoral advisor was Joseph Schumpeter, who died in 1950 and had finished his dissertation under Vasily Leontiev. Keynes and Schumpeter, but also through Schumpeter, Marx, defined the theoretical field Minsky explored. He labeled Marx and Schumpeter as Marxist economists who are conservative and pro-capitalist. Minsky's contribution allows for a more balanced treatment of real and financial aspects of capitalist crisis, pregnant already in Marx, at least, if not always, observed by subsequent generations of self-identified Marxist economists. Like Kalecki, Piero Sraffa is a lesser celebrated, if no less influential, heterodox economist. He is perhaps best known for his attack on the neoclassical justification of profits. Sraffa's close friendship and intellectual collaboration with the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci is well known. Sraffa even provided the books, pens, and paper with which Gramsci wrote the prison notebooks. Indeed, Gramsci considered Sraffa to be a Marxist and a communist. Though often more associated with the surplus approach of classical economist David Ricardo, his initial route in was through Marx via Gramsci. Marx also had an important influence on the old institutional economics of Thorstein Veblen, more remembered today in the discipline of sociology than that of economics, although it did vie for dominance of the latter during the decades prior to World War II. A concern with the dialectical relationship between social structures, that is, political and cultural institutions, and the economic base, drew obvious parallels with a non-dogmatic Marxist understanding of the materialist conception of history. In addition to successive modes of production or stages of social economic development characterizing historical materialism, self-identified Marxist economists have also developed a theory of stages of capitalism relying on institutional innovation in response to structural crises. This draws on the early work of Hilferding, Bukharin, and Lenin in the early 20th century, followed by Baran and Sweezy and Ernest Mandel in the post-war era, and brought up to date by the French regulation approach, that is RA, and the American social structure of accumulation, SSA, theories since the 1970s. The concern of heterodox feminist economics, at least with general questions of social structure, social conditioning, and social embeddedness, and not solely issues of gender and caring labor, likewise has obvious parallels with the Marxist methodological perspective. In particular, Marxist feminists like Silvia Federici have developed influential theories of social oppression and expropriation on this basis, both critiquing and augmenting the traditional Marxist conception of labor. The emergence of social reproduction theory, SRT, through the work of Tithi Bhattacharya and others, seeks to reconcile what Heidi Hartman previously referred to as the unhappy marriage between Marxism and feminism and to their mutual benefit and development. Finally, social heterodox ecological economics has a similar love-hate relationship with Marxism. The idea that economic activity is not just socially, but also ecologically embedded is a logical extension of the historical materialist perspective. Indeed, the genesis of such thinking is already present in Marx's writings on the metabolic rift between circuits of capitalist production and consumption in the cities and the depletion of the soil in rural areas that provided the resources. And Frederick Engels' writing on the dialectics of nature as recounted by Marxist ecologists like John Bellamy Foster. Again, social ecological economics both draws on and substantially critiques and develops these early insights. For many years, Marxist economics concentrated on class conflict in capitalism and did not strongly emphasize capitalism's conflict with nature. Nevertheless, it was only a matter of time before an analysis that identified accumulation as Moses and the prophets could find a possibility of common cause with a movement developing a critique of growth. Ecological economics provides the essential insight that an understanding of economic dynamics does not in itself provide a guide to effective environmental policies. One must also simultaneously understand ecological dynamics to properly understand the impact of the human economy on nature. It is important in all of this not to overstate the case. There are clearly non-Marxist directions and strands associated with each of the leading heterodox schools of economics outside of the self-identified Marxist school. But there is certainly more crypto-Marxism in the heterodox economic community than is generally understood or admitted at any rate. If one were to imagine heterodox economics as a bundle of different heterodox traditions developing through time, it is our contention that in the 20th century, the Marxist strand developed a set of shoulders within the other strands of modern political economy. As a consequence, the Marxist strand partially traces its descent to the present day in the context of these other strands. It's incumbent upon the Marxian tradition to recognize that other heterodox traditions have succeeded in putting flesh on these Marxian bones in ways that are potentially consistent with the development of a historical materialist outlook on capitalism. A reciprocal and perhaps explicit recognition of the Marxian character of many research questions by the other heterodox traditions could substantially contribute to the further emergence of an integrated heterodox alternative to neoclassical economics. So, yeah, that's kind of what it is, and I include a much more specific kind of article that of course appears in a industrial and business economics. It really does have a certain Marxist flavor, and it is actually, I think, a good introduction to cryptocurrencies, which I will not proceed to describe here, but it does exist, and I would hope that people would think about that. Um, uh, so I've come to the end of my little yammering here. I think I'm a little early. And I think I will just stop because I need to prepare for tonight's after hours show, among other things. Uh, I will just remind people that on Saturday, Susanna is going to be showing a film, and that's very exciting. And welcome back to her. We'll talk more about that subsequently, and there'll be Star Trek, etc. As well. There'll be a short thing this weekend in Weekly Marx on the German ideology, and then we'll go to the next chapter in Marx's Volume 1, the Princeton translation edition. Let me see if there are any questions or comments or brickbats or.
Just a brief point to pick you up on.
Sure.
You mentioned the Koch brothers. It's
Yes.
actually pronounced cock.
Nah.
That's it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. We will not proceed into the profane there until we stop. Joe, if you're listening, you can cut off the live stream and then we can start being more profane.